I have given a name to my pain. The Batman.
Always waiting for some Batman to save you.
It's simple. We kill
The Batman of Gotham.
You don't really think you'll win, do you?
I'm Batman.
Hey now, welcome to episode number 148 of the Batman on Film podcast. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of Batman on Film, Bill Jett Ramey. With me today is no one. I'm flying solo, but I do have a very special guest, and that would be the great Michael Uslan, who will talk about the 30th anniversary of Batman 1989, starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson as Batman and the Joker respectively, and of course directed by Tim Burton. We also discuss the 80th anniversary of the character of Batman and the fact that he is going in to the Comic-Con Museum / Hall of Fame in San Diego, the first comic book character to be inducted. And we talk about a few more things Batman related and comic book movie related as well. So, kick back and enjoy, and thanks for listening to Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, and gum original. Going to Comic-Con, and there is a big panel for the 30th anniversary of Batman 89. Tell us about that.
Well, let's back up.
Okay.
And let's start with the fact this is my 55th annual Comic-Con.
Okay.
So I've been there from the beginning when it started in New York City, and here we are, so many years later, 55 years later, and instead of 200 people showing up, when you add in press and entourages, you've got something like 200,000 people showing up.
Yes.
And that's pretty cool.
Yes.
The other big change, really, over the years has been, in the beginning, it was very subversive. I mean, comic books were below everybody's radar. The establishment, society, looked down their nose at comic books and their creators. And we thought we had this little secret club that nobody really knew about. And we had guys like Stan Lee talking to us, it seemed personally, not talking down to us, but talking to us in the letter columns and in his soapbox. And here we are now, where comic books have become so utterly mainstream, to the point where I kind of actually miss the subversiveness that's gone out of it.
I was going to say, do you think, there's a lot more local Comic-Cons than there used to be. I mean, almost every, I won't say every town, but any type of relatively large metropolitan area has some sort of Comic-Con. And even with, at San Diego, you see some of the studios not doing the big Hall H presentations anymore. Do you see a focus moving back toward more of the comics than all the other pop culture stuff like movies and TV and so forth?
Well, let's look at it this way. Yes, there are now Comic-Cons in every mid-range and maybe even every minor city at this point.
Yes.
In North America, I just recently spoke. We did a 30th anniversary Batman thing way up in British Columbia, and they're also getting incredible play internationally. There are now Comic-Cons in China, in Russia, throughout South America, Europe, Australia, everywhere you go practically on the planet, there are now Comic-Cons. And I think the change has been that most of them are misconstrued. Instead of being Comic-Cons, they really should be pop culture cons. And depending on what your personal interests are, you could pick different Comic-Cons that really are geared more laser-like to your particular interests. So if you like anime and manga, you might want to go to Dragon Con in Atlanta. If you like cosplay, you might want to go to a certain one. If you like purely comic books or purely movies or video gaming, there are different comic book conventions that cater to that. I think the word on the street is that if you really love comic books, besides the big conventions like New York and San Diego, you really might want to check out places like Charlotte and Baltimore and Seattle.
Yes.
That really still do very, very much cater to comics. And, I'm one of those people that believes there should be an artist's boulevard, not an artist's alley.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see the spotlight more on so many of the creative people who've contributed to what we all love. That said, here we go with San Diego Comic-Con celebrating its 50th anniversary, celebrating the brand new opening of the Comic-Con Museum, celebrating the brand new opening in conjunction with the Comic-Con Museum of the Comic Book Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the 30th anniversary of the 1989 Batman movie that changed Hollywood and really changed the world culture. We've got the 80th anniversary of Batman. So there is so much to celebrate. And I don't have to tell you, my schedule at this point is from Wednesday noon until Sunday at 6 p.m. My son David and I are on the go nonstop, and it's going to be a lot of fun and an awful lot of celebrating.
Well, that's awesome. The 89 panel. What are you expecting there? It's just a celebration of the film, or are we going to talk about the history of it, or just the impact it had? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I know you've seen my TED Talk
Mm-hmm.
that I give on the making of
Yes.
The first Batman movie.
Yes.
So I'm gonna do a significantly extended version of the TED Talk. We are going to show the very first trailer that came out for the Batman movie, because that was as essential a cog in the wheel to its success as anything. That trailer was what changed fandom's perception of what we were about to do. They were ready to surround the studio with pitchforks and torches. They were in such an uproar that a comedian had been hired to play Batman, and the director directed Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So therefore, the Batman movie was going to be nothing more than a rehash of the 66 TV series.
Yes.
And we needed to make them understand that we were doing a version of Batman that was dark and serious. But since nobody had ever seen a feature film comic book superhero movie like that before, they weren't buying it. And this was even in an era before computers and social media.
Yes.
And the outpouring was so chaotic through the mass media, it was absolutely unbelievable. It was bigger than the outcry initially by the fans against Heath Ledger when they heard and claimed that some gay cowboy was going to
Yes, I lived it. I kind of thought that as well. I think it was like, I read about the casting of Keaton in it was either Starlog or Comic Scene, and I was one that went to when the trailer came out, I went and paid to see the trailer and left afterwards and didn't even see the movie that was in front of. So I was one of those.
Well, I hope we converted you.
Yes. Yeah. As soon as I saw that trailer, I was sold. And actually, I don't know if there was a publicity still of Michael Keaton, the one that he's in front of the Batmobile. And I saw that, and it was either again Comic Scene or Starlog. And I think right then I said, okay, this isn't a redo of the 60s show. And then I saw that trailer, and it was just, I was just completely couldn't wait to see the film. I'd never forget the Batmania back then. It was if you didn't live it, if you missed out, it was something awesome as a Batman fan to go through.
So at the panel on Saturday night, which, by the way, anybody attending San Diego Comic-Con, it's going to be 6:45 p.m. in room 6A at the Convention Center. So that panel, I'm going to try to put everything back in the context of the times, so they could understand a little bit the absolute mania that was going on, initially negatively and then positively. And so that trailer becomes so important to the telling and the retelling of the story historically. In addition, one of the most burning questions I keep getting asked in interviews, and whenever I do Q&A, is how the hell did a kid in his 20s buy the rights to Batman from DC Comics? Because today that is A, considered impossible, B, considered unfathomable, incomprehensible, and again, only if you tell the story by setting it in the times can you begin to understand how I was able to pull that off and how it all came to pass. And then, there's the other aspect of it, which was like many of the critics of the day, and people who were writing articles and reviews about the movie, many of them categorized it as an overnight success. And that's hysterical to me because, as you know, it took me over 10 years to get that movie made.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's important that people understand that, just in the context of if they have any interest for going after their own dreams in life or following their own passions in life, the path that I managed to take and why it's still relevant today to people who would like to do something similar with their own dreams.
Absolutely. What's the legacy of that film?
Well, I think, Bill, people get confused and they start to remember the film or judge the film or categorize the film on the basis of its huge box office success. And that's all true. And there's, absolutely true. But historically, as you look back now, it had a far, far more important impact.
Yes.
Because as that first dark and serious feature film of superheroes, and even with Dick Donner's Superman, which I love the first two, when you look at the first film, it was done seriously on Krypton. It was done seriously in Smallville. But the second he put on the costume and showed up in Metropolis, it was just a fun ride. And it wasn't taken particularly seriously. Whether you look at Gene Hackman's performance or any of them, it just wasn't taken seriously once you got to be a superhero. So it was real important that we show the world you can treat superheroes seriously without laughing at them, that superheroes can be presented to the world in an entertaining way that is palatable for adults and no longer just for 8 to 12-year-old boys. That these things have depth in their stories, they have depth in their characters, and they have thematic heft to them. And I think that's critically important, and we were able to make that point. And so in doing so, we not only changed the perspective of fans, we impacted the world culture and changed the world's perception of comic books and superheroes. The fact that they are workable in entertainment for adults. And we were, I think, the first film of a genre like this that was able to not only transcend borders physically, but transcend the cultures. And, I ascribe several things to that. Number one being that Batman had no superpowers, and people all over the world, no matter where they came from, were able to identify with him strongly. That he has the most primal origin story of any character in comic books, and that story impacts people no matter where they are from. The car is magic no matter where you go. And also, as you know, I subscribe to the Stan Lee theory of supervillains. And that is, as Stan told me, the greatest and most long-lasting superheroes have been those that have had the greatest supervillains, because ultimately those supervillains define the superhero. And, of course, Batman has had the greatest rogues gallery of villains in history. The only two characters in my book that even come near rivaling him in comics were Spider-Man and the Flash. But Batman stands above all, and that's the reason on Wednesday night at the opening of the Comic-Con Museum, we are going to have the induction of Batman as the first comic book character into the new Comic Book Hall of Fame.
That's awesome. Yes, that's just fantastic. And Batman's getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame this year too, as well. Yes, so it's a great year because of Batman's 80th anniversary. There's been a lot of, and I loved being able to go see all the live action films. The first four for sure. Seeing Batman '89 on the big screen again for the first time in almost 30 years basically was just it was something else. I'm so glad that they put that out for people to see it. There were a lot of people who never had a chance to see it on the big screen that are huge Batman fans.
Bill, I hate to tell you this, and you're going to feel really old, but there are currently a lot of people, including some people that are now in college, who were too young to have seen the Dark Knight on the big screen.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I love every time I get to see Batman '89 on the big screen, I still get the chills. The movie holds up incredibly well.
Yes.
I think there was no computer effects.
Mm-hmm.
That it was the 80s. It does not look or feel like an 80s movie. Tim and Anton first made sure of that in terms of their visual approach to it that combined past, present, and future. And it's still more than almost any other film of that era. And, 1989 was often compared to 1939 as potentially being the second greatest year for films in history. And if you look at all of them today, Batman probably stands up one of the best.
Oh, for sure. With Batman's 80th anniversary, and you kind of spoke to this a little bit, just a second ago, Batman, I would argue that Batman is probably the most popular comic book superhero among what I quote-unquote the mainstream, people who are not regular comic book readers and so forth and don't follow this stuff as much as you or I would or other fans. But what is it about Batman? I mean, I know why I'm attracted to him. It's because of the you mentioned the no powers and all that, but there's just something about Batman that makes him so beloved.
Yeah, and I keep going back to the fact that when you strip everything else away, it is the fact that he is a superhero with no superpowers. And that allows his humanity to shine through. And then let's go back to Tim Burton. One of the currently, one of the 5 people I claim that I've had an opportunity to work on projects with who I think are geniuses. And in 43 years, 5 people, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good amount to be able to say. Let's go back to Tim. It was Tim who had what I always refer to as the big idea. And it was that vision that not only made the Batman movie successful in its own revolutionary way, but opened the portal for Marvel to walk through later and impacted every genre movie since then. And it was this. He said, Michael, if we are going to make the first ever serious superhero movie and do not want to get unintentional laughs from the audience, then this movie cannot be about Batman. And that's when my heart sank, of course. And then he said, this movie must be about Bruce Wayne. And that, Bill, was the entire game changer. That was the whole thing. I mean, look at Iron Man films.
Yes.
They really should be titled Tony Stark, not Iron Man. Look at, now they finally are doing some really successful Spider-Man movies again. You go to see them, and you're more interested in what's happening to Peter Parker than what's happening to Spider-Man.
Yes.
And more, the actors are getting their way, which actors love, which is they get to have their own face on screen rather than sit behind a full face mask.
Yes. Well, I would argue, I argue with people, or people talk about the Dark Knight trilogy, and I say that the genius of it, it's about Bruce Wayne. And you were invested, you became invested in Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins, and that's why the ending of Dark Knight Rises resonates so much, because it was about Bruce Wayne, not really Batman.
That's it. And it all started with Tim Burton, who had that initial vision that just worked. And the second part of his vision, which is critically important, was he said the other aspect that we have to take care of is world building. So that from the opening scenes of the 89 movie, audiences had to believe in Gotham City. It had to be the third most important character in the movie, because if they didn't suspend their disbelief and believe in Gotham, they would never then accept a guy dressed as a bat running around and finding a guy like the Joker. And that's the two steps, 1 and 2, to this whole thing. So if you want to talk historically and generally, and I make this a generalization, not a criticism, I just contend, and I have told this to every executive along the way, if you could name just the one singular most essential aspect of Batman that has made him so successful for 80 years, what would that one thing, that one element be? And everybody figures it out, and they all say the same thing. He's a superhero with no superpowers. I said, all right, so why would you ever consider stripping that away from the character, ignoring that in the character, and, having him flying and lit up like a Christmas tree in a suit of armor? Yeah. Akin to Iron Man. Now, I know that sells a lot of toys, and I understand that. But you know me, I'm an old school believer that everything to make a successful movie is based on my 10 rules. Number 1, story. Number 2, story. Number 3, story. Number 4, story. Number 5, story. Number 6, character. Number 7, character. Number 8, character. Number 9, story. And number 10, story. Yes. So, to me, the most interesting interpretations in all the media of Batman have been the ones like with Chris Nolan and with Tim Burton and all the brilliant ladies and gentlemen who have worked on the Batman animated series. Everything from The Mask of the Phantasm, which I think arguably may be the best Batman story ever presented in the media, to their work on my favorite episodes, which are the Mr. Freeze episodes of the Batman animated series. So there are great triumphs of interpreting Batman in various media, but in every case, it keeps coming down to his humanity and not having superpowers, and that is what creates the emotional impact, the emotional attachment that audiences around the world have. Yes, I couldn't agree more. So, standing where you're at now, and I mean that figuratively, you were a Batman fan forever, and The Boy Who Loved Batman is a great book where you depict that. We've had all the movies. Batman has become just popular beyond belief. It's his 80th anniversary. Looking back, what does Batman mean to you now? What does Batman mean to you? Well, I'm going to tell you a story, but first let me just mention, we have been able to set Batman on a path starting in 1989, the result of which is going to culminate tomorrow night at the beginning of the Comic Book Hall of Fame, when the first character inducted is not Superman. Yes. It is Batman. So I think that sums up everything that came out of 1989's Batman and what everybody's been trying to do ever since then. So if I have to sum up its impact on me, I got to go back to this story, and I know, Bill, you know this story. When Ben Melniker and I, Ben, my partner on that, who was my father's age, such a sage, wise man. And we were at the last major studio pitching Batman, the dark and serious Batman. And we were pitching to an older guy who had been at the top of the studio heap for about 25 years. And I'm pitching my heart out for this dark and serious Batman. And he says, Michael, you're crazy. You can't do dark superheroes and serious comic book movies. He said, listen, if you want to make a Batman movie, we will consider doing that with you. But it has to be the funny, pot-bellied guy with the pows, naps, and whams, because that's all audiences will remember and love. And I looked at him and I said, no way. And he sat down in front of me and he looked at me and he said, Michael, better to have a movie than no movie at all. And I looked at him and I said, no. So after that meeting, Ben and I were sitting on a bench on the studio lot, and I was despondent. I mean, that was the last major studio, and I was as down in the dumps as a guy could get. And Ben said to me, isn't it ironic, Michael, that of all the no's we received, the final one came from you? And he said, Michael, you know what you are? And I turned to Ben. I said, yeah, Ben, I'm an idiot. He says, no, you're Batman's Batman. You're his protector. You're his defender. You have this vision of what you believe is the true Batman, and you are protecting him by making that the most important thing. And I'll tell you, Bill, that little session with Ben picked me up out of the dumps and kind of renewed my determination to keep going no matter what it took. And it was an amazing moment in my life that I will never forget, but it kind of sums up the impact for me and the role I was ascribed. And here we are 30 years later.
Yeah, I can. I not on the scale of you, but I can relate to that because I feel protective of the character and want him to be portrayed correctly on the big screen. Speaking of which, how excited are you for the Batman?
I couldn't be more excited. I could not be more excited. You know, when people start to talk about casting, and you know my position on this.
Yes.
Of all of the Batman movies, it's come up time and time again, whether you're talking about Michael Keaton, Ben Affleck, Heath Ledger, Anne Hathaway. The focal point should really not be on the actor, because Batman has never been and never should be about, Tom Cruise playing Batman. And it should be about Batman. It should be about Bruce Wayne. And the actor not being the focal point for the whole thing. So I think if you want to have a focal point, what you need to do is look at the director, look at the filmmaker, and then you have to ask this series of questions. Does the filmmaker have an understanding of the character? Does he or she have a passion for the character, a love for the character? Does he or she have a vision for the character? And if so, do you believe that he or she can execute that vision? So once you answer those questions, and if you're convinced of that, then you've got to step back and make sure that person has all the tools that they need and be a great big cheerleader. Because for me, in this case, knowing the darkness and the humanity and the seriousness, and something I have been clamoring for since I started screaming about getting a second movie going, was that he's the world's greatest detective. We really haven't seen that to date. All these things make me so excited about Matt Reeves and where the franchise is going next.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to finish up with this. It's called This or That. I stole this from Sammy Hagar, but it's kind of fun to do. So you got to pick one. If you need to hedge your bets, I understand. So I'm going to give you a choice. Detective Comics or Batman?
Wow. Let me think for a minute. That's not a quick answer. I have to think about 1,000 issues of one and
yes.
800 of another.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Detective Comics.
Okay. This will be okay. Go ahead.
That's governed by the fact that my favorite Batman story of all time, as you know, appeared in Detective Comics 439. So that's probably the clincher for me. And I look at some of the seminal key issues, not just Detective 27, but Detective 33, that were so important to the emerging canon here. So I'm going to go with that.
Okay. Sidekicks or solo Batman?
Solo Batmans. Again, I am a subscriber to Stan Lee's theory, and Stan absolutely hated sidekicks. He said there is no rational reason for an adult male to be palling around and placing in constant jeopardy all night long a teenager. It doesn't make sense in the real world, and that's why when he and Jack brought back Captain America, they were not quick to bring back Bucky. When he revived the Human Torch in the form of Johnny Storm, there was to be no Toro that came along with him. So yeah, I go along with that. Now that does not mean there can't be a filmmaker who has a very specific vision of now how to do this in this day and age, reflecting the world and the country we're currently living in. So I'm not dismissing it. I'm just saying my preference, barring hearing somebody's particular vision for how to do it, my preference runs to solo.
Okay, very good. This will be tough. Batman 89 or Batman Begins?
Why don't you ask me which my favorite kid is?
I knew that one would be tough. I have a hard time.
Let me address it this way. So Batman 89 was my dream come true in life. And it took much of my life to that point until it was able to happen. I was able to, I felt, get this show on the road to putting the darkness and dignity back into Batman. Jack Nicholson as the Joker was like a dream for me. Because he did reflect the Joker of the comic books of that era leading up into the 80s. The clown prince of crime. He really did that. It was so seminal in so many ways, but for that movie, there never would have been a Dark Knight trilogy. So
absolutely.
And if I call Tim and Anton first geniuses, I also call Christopher Nolan a genius. Absolutely. As you know, I always say that Chris raised the bar for all comic book movies because these were the first three. When you walked out of the theater, you didn't have to say anymore, that was a great comic book movie. You can now say that was a great film. Yep. And that was a huge elevation for the entire industry. And I think filmmakers use that as the high bar to shoot for when they make their own movies since then. As they should. So, yep. Batman Begins came at it in a completely different era of the country and the world. The cultures had shifted. This was post 9/11 now. Everything was different. The world was no longer black and white. It was gray. It was order versus chaos. So many issues about how far should our government go to combat terrorism? At what point do you drop down in using their methods where you no longer are the hero and you've just come down to their level? There were so many thematic issues being dealt with. And in terms of film, story, and the reality of it, it was amazing. The whole trilogy was amazing. You know, yes. I always say that Christopher Nolan only made one Batman movie in 3 acts. Yeah. And if you follow the three of them and binge watch the three of them, you will see one of the most beautifully crafted movies ever made, where every setup has a payoff. Every character arc peaks and rolls perfectly. It's a beautiful thing to watch. Yes, especially Rises. So, Rises brings it all together. If you really, a lot of Batman Begins and Rises. So, yes. And we also have to give Tim credit, because when Tim left the franchise, he left it with gaping questions to be answered at a later date. What happened to Bruce Wayne after his parents were killed? Where did he get his training? Who's building those Batmobiles? I mean, there were so many questions that needed to be addressed, and that was a great portal for Christopher Nolan to walk through. All right, last one. The Beatles or the Rolling Stones? Beatles. There you go. Okay. All right, Michael. Thank you. Enjoy Comic-Con. Will do, Bill. And I'll give you a rundown after all the festivities are over. And again, I hope to see any Batman on Film fans Saturday night, 6:45 p.m., room 6A at the convention center.
We will definitely plug it on the site, and I will probably be out there next year. My son is about to be a senior in high school, and there was like way too much going on with him with college and all kind of stuff this summer, so we stayed at the house. So enjoy, appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon, sir.
That's great. Take care.
You too.
Hey now! You have been listening to the official podcast of the one and only Batman on Film website. On Twitter, follow BOF at Batman on Film and the Batman Podcast Network at BatPod Network. For Jett and everyone at Batman on Film, I'm announcer Rachel. Thanks for listening to the authoritative, definitive, the original Batman on Film.